This is it, the battle to end all battles, a contest for the featherweight champion of the world, a fight to the finish. Hey, Brian Miller here, and welcome to Audio for Content Creators, where we help you sound better and level up for all your content creation needs. And in this video, we're going to pit a bunch of the budget on-camera shotgun mics against each other in a blind series of comparisons. A series of blind comparisons? What did I just say? Specifically, we're talking about the brand new Movo VXR10 Pro, which is still $50, just like its predecessor, the original VXR10. So we're gonna put it up against its own predecessor, but we're also gonna put it up against, of course, the Rode VideoMicro. Then we're gonna put it up against the AverMedia AM133, a mic in this genre that many of us, I think, have forgotten about, that's surprisingly good. And finally, just for kicks, we're gonna put it up against the Rode VideoMic NTG, which way outclasses the rest of these, but sometimes the results are surprising when you take a budget mic and a mic 5 times the price and compare them. As for test conditions, 100% of everything you hear will be raw and unprocessed. These mics will be overhead in a position like this, being recorded directly into the Tascam DRO5X, which is strapped right here. The mics are being recorded during these tests simultaneously, one into the right channel, one into the left channel, so that I can split them in post, and that way we are actually comparing the exact same lines of dialogue back and forth and not two different recordings. And just for the sake of completeness, you're now listening to the microphone sitting on top of my camera. My camera is almost 6 feet away from me right now so that I can have a nice wide shot of everything in frame. And so what you're hearing right now is exactly why you would boom one of these mics overhead and either run a long cable back to the camera, right, just a long extension TRS cable, or you would do what I'm doing, which is record directly into a portable audio recorder and then sync and post. If it were up to me, everybody would be using portable audio recorders to capture their audio and sync and post because the quality is vastly superior. When you record directly into a camera, you're relying on the camera's internal mic preamps, which are essentially non-existent, and every single camera's preamps sounds a little bit different even though they're all crappy. So recording these into a portable audio recorder actually tells us what the mics sound like in ideal conditions. As for the tests themselves, every single one of these will feature me reading a single line or two out loud from a book, the same line or two in every single test, and I'll just put an A or a B on the screen to let you know what you're listening to. Go through each test and write down which one you like better, and at the end of all of them, I'll let you know which one was which for each test. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Magic only exists in our memory. It takes our mind at least a few moments to juxtapose what actually happened with what we know before we can conclude that something impossible has taken place. Now you've had a chance to listen to all of the blind comparisons. Hopefully you've marked down A or B for each one, which one you liked best in any of the shootouts. I'm about to give you which one was which in each of the 4 tests. So if you don't want to know, pause, go back, stop, abandon ship. 3, 2, 1. Here are the results. All right, now head into the comments and let us know what you thought. Which ones did you pick out in each test? Were you surprised by the results that you got or what your ear picked out? Do you like the VXR10 Pro compared to the original VXR10? Do you think the new VXR10 Pro compares to the VideoMicro or vice versa? Is the VideoMic NTG worth 5 times the price of the VXR10 Pro or the Rode VideoMicro? As of this very moment, I actually haven't heard any of the tests themselves, so I'm going to stop filming right now, head over to the computer, listen to everything, come back and tell you my thoughts, or at least my impressions on each of these comparisons. And I'm back. I had a chance to take a listen to the various comparisons, all the different audio samples that we just did. I went in there, I level normalized them, which is something that you already know because you heard the comparisons, whatever. The point is this. I thought that the VXR10 Pro held up very, very well most of the time. My tag was sticking out. I don't think that you could tell. Get back in. First things first. I hate to keep bashing on the Rode VideoMicro after all these years, but it sounded terrible. It just sounds terrible. Why? I think so many people like the VideoMicro because it has that compressed sound right out of the box. The same is true of our relationships, whether they are friendly, professional, or romantic. It's got that really aggressive 100 hertz roll-off, which means none of the low-end crap gets in. And so if you're a vlogger and you're running and gunning and you're out there in the world and there's a lot of background noise, cars and trucks and planes, trains, and automobiles and all that jazz, it's going to help isolate your voice without any post-processing because it's got the 100 hertz roll-off and a very targeted, compressed sound. So I get it. But it doesn't sound good. It's not a good sounding microphone. It may be useful if you have no interest in doing anything with your audio, and I get it. If that's you, go for the Rode VideoMicro. Other than that, I think it just sounds terrible. It sounds thin. It sounds fake. The compression that you hear coming out of that microphone does not sound natural at all. Okay, now to the original VXR10, the microphone that I raved about for years and years. I'm torn on this microphone now because when you listen to it in comparison to the new VXR10 Pro, they don't sound like they're related or even made by the same company. Is it just me? The same is true of our relationships, whether they are friendly, professional, or romantic. The VXR10 Pro does not feel like a new version of the VXR10. It feels like a completely different microphone. They don't share any tonal characteristics as far as I can tell. It doesn't feel like the next version or a pro version of the VXR10. I feel like they could have just named this a totally different microphone instead of releasing it at the exact same price and saying this is an upgraded model. Now, obviously, the VXR10 Pro has a headphone jack, which makes it better in some ways than the original VXR10. It certainly gives you different options because when you plug it into a phone, tablet, or computer, you can not monitor your audio as you're talking, but you can listen to playback without having to plug in, unplug, and plug the microphone. The point is, I thought the original VXR10 sounded fuller, much deeper, but it wasn't necessarily a good sound. Now, I love that microphone when compared to the VideoMicro. Because it's got that fuller, deeper sound, I have the ability to play in post. But when compared against this new VXR10 Pro, it's clear how muddy the VXR10 is, right? That low response, that deep response from the VXR10, it's not a very nice deep, it's just deep. And so I do end up having to, when I used to use that mic a lot, shelve out or carve out some of those low frequencies that had built up that made it sound muddy. This new VXR10 Pro does not sound muddy at all. Having said that, it doesn't sound very deep either. It sounds brighter and harsher like the Rode VideoMicro, but without all the compression. So I would still pick the VXR10 Pro over the VideoMicro. I have no idea if I would pick it over the VXR10. You can buy these at the link in the description. You can also buy these t-shirts. I've had a bunch of people tell me, you should put one of those buy me a cup of coffee links. No, I'm not gonna do that. That's a weird donation and I don't need donations. But if you wanna buy a coffee mug and then we'll have a virtual cup of coffee together, by all means, go do that. Now on to the AverMedia AM133. This is a slightly more expensive mic than the VXR10 Pro, than the VXR10, than the Rode VideoMicro. It's like 70 bucks maybe. It's not that easy to find anymore. It was made as a live streamer's microphone. AverMedia makes a lot of live streaming gear. And it's a fascinating microphone. Here's a link to a full overview video that I did on that last year. What I loved about it when I originally reviewed it last year is that it has a very neutral response. It doesn't feel overhyped in the low end, but it has a full low end response. It doesn't feel harsh or bright in the top end, but it does have a full top end response. The same is true of our relationships, whether they are friendly, professional, or romantic. I kind of liked the AM133. I wish it had more gain. And finally, the Rode VideoMic NTG. This is not a fair comparison. The mic is $250. It does a billion things, and it's one of the best all-around, most versatile mics a content creator could possibly own today. Here's a video I did all about that. How did the VXR10 Pro compare? Nah, it didn't really. The VideoMic NTG really proved that it's worth 5 times the price, or at least it's worth a much more, it is a much more expensive microphone, and it sounds like a much more expensive microphone. The same is true of our relationships, whether they are friendly, professional, or romantic. How much of a difference is it going to make for the average content creator where your audience is just listening on earbuds or Bluetooth earbuds with one in, or just their phone's speakers? Not much. If you were listening to these, I mean, if you listened to this video, all these blind audio comparisons just out of your phone or tablet speakers without headphones or anything, or even earbuds, you probably barely noticed a difference in any of them. And that's kind of the point of comparisons like this. Audio folks like you and me, we're listening really critically, and there's a good reason to improve your audio. I think that you should have the very best audio quality that you can afford, whether your audience can tell or not, because you're a content creator and you care about audio and you care about content quality. I haven't eaten all day. I gotta go get some lunch. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, ding the notification bell because YouTube algorithm, etc., etc. And having said all that, my name is Brian Miller. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and always remember, our world, the battery ran out literally right before I said my last sentence. Thanks so much for sticking with me. My name is Brian Miller, and always remember, our world is a shared experience. Every interaction is meaningful, and every person you meet, even virtually, is important. So come back anytime to sound better and level up, and we'll see you soon.